as a starting point for discussion, so that we could start our conversation in January with, and again, some kind of more formal announcement of the announcement, what the board would like to see in any kind of an application, how to apply, and then what the process is going forward from there. And then we'd have the required public hearing, and then be in a position to take action by mid-February. So that's out there as a starting point for discussion, and I'd be very much interested in your feedback. So. Vice Chair Russell.
So thank you, Chair Anderson. What I would propose is that potentially you and I write up some sort of guidelines that we would like to consider using and circulate it to the board for their questions or comments, and then go from there. Because I think that obviously this is news that everyone's still processing. I think people need time to think through what makes the most sense, and strikes a good balance between us receiving information that we need, but also not putting too much time and responsibility on applicants, because obviously there's a lot going on right now in the community and in people's homes, and then obviously with the holidays. So trying to strike some balance between making sure that we get information, but not putting too much on the applicants. I think also we probably want to flesh out a little bit more what kinds of things we would like to hear them answer during the public hearing, just so they have some sort of guideline in terms of potential topics they might want to consider including in their statement. But I think that, as much as we can streamline the process, but also receive the information that we need, would probably be in the best interest of everybody involved.
Thank you, Vice Chair Russell. Agreed that I think we need to come up with those and circulate that. I would be just hoping if there's any initial input anybody wants to give tonight, we could get it. If not, as you say, this is news and people need time to process things. So we can certainly take this up at another meeting. But Mr. Reitinger.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I do have a few initial comments. The first comment is, at least it occurs to me that we probably ought not have the application window closed until after the 4th, because it just seems right for me. It seems right to me, I should say, to allow applications at least once the position is formally open. So some date that they would need to be submitted by, but it should be after the 4th of January. I'd suggest as lightweight a process as possible for very much the reasons Vice Chair Russell indicated. It seems to me that in terms of application materials, a cover letter or a cover letter and CV, if someone wants to submit a CV, or if you prefer a resume, is probably fine. And I think the idea of suggesting some topics that people want to include in the letter or the CV would be, or when their oral discussion at the public hearing would be good. And I would keep it relatively short and simple. I think mostly what people like me are going to want to hear about are why, what are people's qualifications and why do they want to be on the board. We've all run on at least one occasion for the school board, and so I think we have a sense of what people and we want to hear. And then I would say as soon as possible, we should probably pick out the timeline and put the public hearing on the calendar, because we'll have fairly strict timelines to go through. We're going to want anybody who's a candidate ample time to make sure that they're able to be present at that public hearing to give a talk. So I guess my watchwords would be simplicity and certainty as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Reitinger. Any other initial thoughts at this point? I guess the other question I would just like to ask is if the outlines of what I laid out generally work for folks, because then Vice Chair Russell and I can go in and try to fill in a little bit more of those details to start a more concrete discussion. Ms. Downs.
Yeah, I think I concur with everything that you, Chair Anderson, and Ms. Russell and Mr. Reidinger have said. I think sort of piggybacking on what Mr. Reidinger said, we are going to be, when this person comes on board, we'll be right in budget season. So they'll be hitting the ground running with the budget. So, I think talking, whether that's during the public hearing or whether we might ask for that specifically, any sort of budget background would be something to think about. But in general, I think the outline, the timeline that you gave and the three of you have talked about making it as simple as possible. And I think that would be good. The simpler, the quicker turnaround we can make to get that position filled by mid-February.
Thank you, Ms. Downs. Okay, I think that gives at least me a sense of things. Vice Chair Russell, I don't know if you feel like we've got enough to sort of start working on. And perhaps I think this makes sense as a topic for us to make sure we talk about again on our in one of our meetings in December. Perhaps our December 15th meeting would be the appropriate time, because that'll give us a little bit more time to think about things, but still be able to inform the community with plenty of lead time. So. Unless there's any other final comments on this. Okay. All right. So Vice Chair Russell and I will take this information and some thoughts in mind about trying to put all of the timing together, and then we will come back to the board at a future meeting here in December to lay this out again, and then be poised to take action in January. So, all right. Then we have one final item on our agenda tonight, which is item 3.03, a reminder of our school board meeting schedule. Just want to take some time tonight just to remind everybody of what we've got left on our calendar for 2020, because we still have quite a bit left. And that's assuming we don't end up having another meeting later in the year. And also going to be talking a little bit about reminders for the process for the school calendar and the process that we've gone through for the renaming. And I want to just make sure folks know that if there's comments on either of those processes, I'm happy to hear them. So I want to start with, we have a joint budget meeting, a joint budget work session with City Council scheduled next Monday, December 7th at 7:30, I believe it is, Dr. Noonan. Yes, thank you. And, this is an annual opportunity for the division and the general government to present background information to both the board and the City Council as we're really sort of beginning in earnest the work on the budget cycle next year. And each year, it's typically the time that we get a more formal sense of Council's budget guidance, although they don't actually take action to give us the budget guidance until a meeting later in December. We'll at least have some sense of where things are going. And then be able to give information that we think folks need to have. So, Dr. Noonan, I wanted to ask if there's any specific guidance you'd sort of look like you would like to have from the board about material to be presented next year. At the Budget and Finance meeting most recently, there was a question about what level of detail to present this year, given the extraordinary circumstances with budget impacts from COVID. So I don't know if you're looking for any guidance from us. If not, that's fine. I just want to.
Yeah, I think the intention was to put it in the Friday update and have you take a look at it. Kristen and Kristen Michael and Michelle Kopic and I have been working heavily on it, and I've been sort of working with them on it. It is a little bit more detailed and a little longer than it normally is. And part of the reason for that is that given the conversation we had at the most recent budget finance meeting, I really feel like it's important that we share a little bit more information about sort of where we're headed with respect to our budget, what our numbers are going to look like, just sort of what our revenues are going to look like, what our expenditures are going to look like. And then without going into too much detail about programmatic growth, although we have put a few things in there, and I don't want to get ahead of the board either, but assuming that we all are going to get behind a salary increment a step and a COLA like we have in the past. We would like to give some more refined information about what the cost of that is, and then ultimately what the transfer would look like it would need to be close to get to where we would be able to do that. Because the one thing that my experience has told me in the last several years of these meetings is that the guidance that's provided to us just as sort of comes out of thin air. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that as though we don't actually have an opportunity to tell them what we really need before they come up with the guidance. And so this year, I'd like to give a little bit more detail about what our needs are, preliminary needs are, before they actually provide us any kind of guidance going forward. So I'd like to put that presentation in the Friday update and ask for you to take a look at it. And if you do have feedback, to please provide it. And if we can get it to you sooner than that, we will.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. All right, so that was just to make sure that everybody knows that's coming up and what we have an opportunity to do this year. And so thank you. Our next board meeting is December 8th, and there are going to be two main items on the agenda, and our vote on the calendar for the 2021-2022 school year and our vote on potential school renaming. Those are big topics, and we need to reserve sufficient time for that. So the intention is to defer other action items that we would typically bring up in a meeting, other policies to be discussed and other decisions that need to be made, to the work session on the 15th of December, and set into that a special session where we actually are doing business and taking action. So that's sort of the structure of those two. The preparation for next week, on the calendar and on the school renaming, I wanted to take a moment to sort of remind ourselves and the community of both processes that we've gone through, and also emphasize that there is an opportunity to make public comment, both in written form and actually live on the 8th as well. So just to make sure folks know that there's still time to make comment. So as a reminder, for the calendar, we started this year with a work session discussion back on October 27th, when we received information on the various considerations for the 2021-2022 calendars, including potentially adding a number of major religious holidays to the calendar, as well as some new state holidays for the state of, Commonwealth of Virginia. And the board gave some initial guidance back to Dr. Noonan and Mr. Bates and Ms. Michael that night. Went back, the committee process went forward to come forward with some refinements. And on November 17th, Mr. Bates and Ms. Michael updated us on the staff process that had gone forward to develop 4 candidate calendars that included all of the major religious holidays that were under consideration. And we had a nice comparison table of the different options that had been developed to that stage, and the board had an opportunity to discuss and give further feedback on that, which, among other things, we expressed a desire to have an option with a start date 1 week before Labor Day and a shortened winter break to allow an earlier end date than would otherwise be possible. And that all happened back on November 17th, and all of the meetings for the October 27th meeting and for the November 17th meeting are available on board docs. So next week on the 8th, we'll be receiving the final calendar options, the results of a survey of staff that has gone on, and have a chance to discuss all of that before taking action to adopt the calendar for next school year. So at this point, I'll pause and I'll just ask if anyone has any questions about the process or something else that I forgot that we should remind everybody about, and the plan for voting on that calendar next week. Just trying to make sure that we have that all clear. Okay. So that takes us to the school renaming question. And I want to start really by reminding the community and ourselves of the process that we've gone through since June 30th, when the board decided to consider changing the names of the potential names of the schools. We adopted at that point a multi-step process to gather information to help us make our decision. And each one of those steps that we went through was important to gather information. It gave us important material for us to consider. None of those individual steps would have been sufficient alone. And just kind of want to remind everybody what some of those steps were. First, we've received hundreds, literally hundreds of written and live public comments at more than a dozen meetings since June. And we've